Okay, Masechta Bava Kama, Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Just one point I'd like to reflect on from yesterday. That thanks to the questions, just to clarify one thing. If we remember, we saw in the Gemara a case, a suffix that Rava had about a person who we're dealing with the sukkahs of bore, digging a pit, and someone falls into the pit, and the damages that take place, and who's liable. So the Gemara spoke about a case where the first person dug 9 tefachim, and the second person came along and dug an extra tefach to get it up to 10. So we saw in that case there's a machloikis between Rebbe and Rabbanon. This is an important machloikis. Who takes the liabilities in this case? If, let's speak about for now, Nezikin takes place. That means the animal fell in and broke its leg, didn't die, but the animal fell in and Nezikin took place. So who's responsible? So according to the Rabbanon, we always say that the second person who dug it takes the responsibility. They don't split it. The second person who took it from 9 to 10 and dug that final 10th tefach, he takes all the responsibility. He takes over. And according to Rebbe, they split the responsibilities each. They both pay. As shutfim, they both pay. So we saw that the Gemara says Rava had a question. What would be if that second guy who dug the 10th tefach, he then came back and he filled it up again? That was the Gemara that said about halfway on the Amud that said, "Boy Rava tam tefach v'silek avonov mahu." The Gemara had a question in that case. That means that the second guy extended it to 10, and then he put it back to 9, and he put it back. So just to clarify one thing that I got clear from some Rishonim, that they say as follows. They say this question that Rava's got is only a question according to the Rabbanon's opinion. Rabbanon are the ones that say they always go after the second person. The second person, he takes over the responsibilities of the whole board. So normally we say he takes responsibility. So the question over here is, what would be if he dug the 10th one and then he put it back, the tefach, he filled it back up? Do we say that whatever he did, he's just removed now, and we're back to square one, and it's as if he didn't do anything, and therefore the first person's chayiv? Or do we say he still took over the whole thing? Since he took over it from 9 to 10, he took it over, and he takes it over, even if he's gonna go and fill back the other tefach, because it's considered he took it over. However, according to this is what the Rosh says this, and also the Talmud Rabbeinu Tam to Rishonim, they say that according to Rebbe, this question doesn't start, because Rebbe never says that the second person takes over the responsibilities of the board. Rebbe always says that they're both shutfin. They're both shutfin over here. So according to Rebbe, if you're only a shutaf, so then as long as you took away whatever you did as a shutaf, then you've taken it away, and we'll be back to square one. The first person will be chayiv. So they say, according to Rebbe, it's definitely going to be that we'll say whatever he did, if he takes it away, then he's taken away. We're never going to say he takes it over, because Rebbe doesn't hold of that svara that you take over the whole board. So this little piece of Gemara over here is only going according to Rabbanon. That's what I just wanted to add to clarify from yesterday's shir. Okay, now we're at a new Gemara which we started yesterday, but we'll go over it again, and it's going directly off the Mishnah. It's an interesting concepts we're going to have today. I hope that it's clear. Some of them are not even so clear to myself, but we'll together hopefully work it through. So the Mishnah said, Bor shel shnei shutfin. I'm just going to the Mishnah on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. It's a short one-line Mishnah, but now the Gemara is going to address the Mishnah. Bor shel shnei shutfin, over alav arishon v'lo chiso, hasheni v'lo chiso, hasheni chayev. So we're talking about a bor which belongs to two people. And I just want to say, also to clarify one point, we often view a bor as a damaging thing, which it definitely is a damaging thing. However, there is an aspect of bor that is not so damaging in terms of it's a useful thing. People sometimes, one person, two people can be shutfin in a bor, and they want to have a bor in their field in order to have water in it, in order to lashkot et hasadeh. They want to water the field, or they want to water the animals. So it's often used as a good thing, and they're not interested in filling it up. They want to keep it because they want to use it for the water. So it's a thing that you're allowed to keep. If it's in your reshus, I don't want to get too much into the details of because we spoke about whether you're chayiv on the bor in your reshus, but at least if it's in your reshus and your mafkir, the area around the bor, then according to some opinions, you are chayiv on that bor. In any event, the person's responsibility is to watch his bor, to shomer it. How do you shomer it? The most basic way is to cover it with a covering. If it's covered with a covering, then it's considered that you're not going to be chayiv anymore if something happens, just like a shore. You know, you saw the sugyas previously about having a shore. A person's allowed to own a shore as long as he watches it properly, he guards it, he puts it in a fence. then he's okay. The same thing with a bore. As long as you cover it and it doesn't, and it's not going to be able to cause the damages, then you're okay. So what happened in this Mishnah? Seemingly in this Mishnah, the two people own the bore, and they both basically went past it, as we'll see the details in a minute, and they didn't cover it. So it says that the liability is on the shame. The second person meaning, I want to clarify, we're not talking about two people digging it one after the other when we speak about the first person, the second person. Here we're talking about two owners of the bore, that the first person used the bore or was next to the bore or walked past the bore and then left the site, and the second person came on site, used it or walked past it and then left it. So again, we'll see the details, but the Mishnah says the second person takes responsibility. So now this is the Gemara. We're starting off on Nun Aleph Amud Beis, which says as follows. From the two dots, it says, it's about 12 lines up from the bottom. The two dots. So the Gemara says, until when is the first person going to be exempt over here? We said in the Mishnah, the second person is Chayev, who left it. From when is the first person exempt? And Rashi over here explains that we're dealing with a case that it doesn't mean to say, one second, the pshitan on the honey over the nishtamish ka'ama, right. Rashi says it's obvious that if they both passed the ball and they weren't using it, they're both going to be chayiv. They both didn't cover it. They're both equally as responsible. So seemingly the Mishnah is obviously missing some piece of information that's telling us that only the second person is chayiv. So what's the piece of information that we're missing? So Rabbi Yosef to Amrit Arvayu Mishmeid the Rabbi Bar Chana to Amar Mishmeid the Rebbe Mani. Two opinions over here. What Rebbe Mani actually said. Chad Amar Mishen Menichoy Mishtamish. That means to say the first person when he left the site, the second person was being mishtamish with the ball. Being mishtamish means he was drawing water out of the ball, he was swimming in the ball, he was splashing in the ball, whatever he was doing, he was using the ball. So the first person, you can't hold him responsible. Why didn't he cover it when he left? Because it makes sense he didn't cover it when he left. The second person was using it. So he obviously, the second person assumes responsibility when the first person left. So that's what the Mishnah means, that the Sheni is chayiv because the first person left the site with the second person using it. That's what one opinion says. It's not enough that he leaves the site with the person using it. It has to be he actually hands over to him the cover for the ball. That means the ball's got a certain covering, a certain shmirah that we said. And when they left the site, the first person said, "Here, Mr. Sheni, you're the second person, you're my shutuf. Here's the covering. When you leave, make sure that you cover the ball." Only in that case do we say that when the first person leaves, is going to be potter. So the question is, does the first opinion holds it's enough that he left, that the second person was mishtamish with the ball, using it, and the second person says it's not enough that he was mishtamish with it. The second person has to be that he handed it over to him the cover. That's the first machloikas we have over here. That's the machloikas Hamiroi. Well, then the Gemara says katanoi. This can fit with like a machloikas tanoi, as we see in the following brisa. Amad le'mayi minabo. Someone who draws water from the ball, the second person comes along and says, "Leave the ball to me, right? I'm going to draw the water now." The second person says, The Tanakhama holds, since the first person left the scene and he left the second person being mishtamesh, then he's potter. The first person is potter now. That's exactly in line with the first opinion that we said. That as long as he leaves the scene when the second person is mishtamish, and the first person is potter. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he's the arguing opinion over here. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, from when he hands over the cover of the bore, then the first person will not be any more chayiv. He'll be potter from once he hands it over. Not enough that he's mishtamish. So that fits perfectly what we said, that the machloikas we just had fits with this brisa with the two opinions, the Tanakama and the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Say that again. The second one is he's going to be chayiv if he's the one that left the scene and didn't cover the ball. The discussion over here is when did the first one become potter? Did he become potter if he left the second one using it, or did he become potter when he handed over the cover? But the second one, when he leaves the scene and he leaves the ball uncovered, he's certainly going to be chayiv. He's certainly going to be chayiv. The question is, when did the first one become potter? Right. So now the Gemara says, what exactly is going on behind this machloikas? What's the shoyrish of the machloikas? Why is it that he holds that it's enough that he's just using it, and the other opinion holds he has to hand it over? So here's where the fun starts. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Sova yesh breira. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds, he was the one that said that you have to hand over the actual covering. He holds of a principle called yesh breira, which we'll see what that means in a minute. Each person is coming to draw water from their own bore. We'll define these words in a minute. Rabbanon Savri ein breira, and Rabbanon hold ein breira. So what does this mean, yesh breira, and what does this mean, ein breira? Now, it could be that you come across this in other Gemaras, in other concepts, but this yesh breira and ein breira is a fundamental machloikas that there is in the Gemara in several places, and it applies to several different cases. Maybe we'll give some of the examples of some of the cases that it applies. But it basically means, can you retroactively clarify something that happened in the past? In other words, there was something that happened in the past that at that point in time there was a suffix involved. I'll say it, but often klali, and then we'll give an example. There was something happened in the past that was a suffix, and we need some future event to clarify what that thing was. Do we say yesh breira and the future event will clarify that which previously we had a suffix about? It can retroactively clarify what we were doing then. Or do we say no, ein breira, and since there was a suffix over there in the beginning, we cannot later retroactively clarify what happened? I'll give you maybe two examples. One example, the Gemara and the Mishnais in Eruvin speak about. There's a principle that on Shabbos, a person's got a tchum Shabbos. A person's allowed to go 2,000 amos from wherever he brought in Shabbos. That's called his mokum shvisa. That's where he stayed. And he's got 2,000 amos in all directions to travel, to walk. And he is not allowed to walk further than 2,000 amos from that radius around him. There's all sorts of different halachas. If he's in a city, you measure from the end of the city. How do you measure? Etc., etc. But to put it simply, it's 2,000 amos. For example, if a person's not in a city, he's got 2,000 amos around him in all directions. But if a person wishes, he can extend his erev, or rather, he can relocate his erev to another location. That when Shabbos comes in, if he wants to go an extra 1,000 amos, let's say, to his east. So what he does when Shabbos comes in, he decides, he takes some bread and he goes 1,000 amos to his east, puts the bread over there, and says, "This is where I want the 2,000 amos to start measuring from." Then he'll get an extra 2,000 amos on top of his 1,000 that he's traveled it. So he can move it to that side. Similarly, he can do it to the other side, but you can't do it to both sides because the person's got one mokum where he stays, and from there you measure the 2,000. So the Mishnah speaks about a case where a person's not sure basically which side he wants to go when Shabbos comes in. Either there's an attack from goyim that are coming to the city, or maybe the Mishnah speaks about a case that a big Talmud Chacham is coming to town, but he's not sure which side of the town, which side of the city the Talmud Chacham is going to be. So the guy's a smart guy, he takes 2 pieces of bread, he puts one on 1,000 amos on the east of the city, 1,000 amos on the west of the city, and he says, if the Rav, when he comes to the east of the city, I want my Mokum Eruv to be on the east, and if he comes to the west, I want my Mokum Eruv to be on the west. That was the thing which is a suffix. He didn't know when Shabbos came in where the Rav was going to be. He didn't know, and he wants to use this principle of breira to say that when the Rav will come, it will retroactively clarify that this was the Eruv that he used. So could a person do such a thing? That's dependent on this machlokas whether yesh breira or ein breira. If we hold yesh breira, then we say there is such a thing called clarification, and a person we can retroactively clarify that the Eruv, the original Eruv that he put on that side, will extend his amos. Even though we didn't know at the time when he did it, but he can clarify it later. That's one example. I hope it wasn't too confusing. There's another example of that the Gemara in Gittin speaks. Many examples, but one more I can think of is the Gemara in Gittin speaks about a person who's got 2 wives, and it could be that they've got the same names, and he wants to be megarish one of them, but he says, "I'm going to be megarish with whichever one walks out of the door first." This get is going to be miyuchad for whichever of the 2 wives walks out of the room first, and there's a halacha that a get has to be written lishma. Get has to be written specifically for that woman. You can't just write a general get. It has to be specifically for that woman. So we don't know when he wrote the get which woman it was going to be. So do we say that when the one whoever leaves, that retroactively will clarify that this get was written lishma for this woman or not? That's also dependent on the question of yesh breira or ein breira. Now, if we try and translate that back to what's going on over here, we've got here shutfim. We've got two shutfim in this bore. We said they both dug the bore. They both are responsible for the bore. The question over here of breira and ein breira comes as to when the question is when two shutfin own an item of shutfus and they use it, right? In other words, who do we really say this bor belongs to? Does it belong to Reuven, or does it belong to Shimon, or does it belong to both of them? So if we hold of yesh breira, what we say is like this: we say that whenever Reuven uses the bor, at that moment it belongs to him, because that will clarify when they originally purchased this bor, they both purchased it together, and we have to say that the purchase that they made will help him in order to use the bor. So when Reuven uses the bor, we say it retroactively clarifies that the kinyan, the acquisition when they bought it, will show us that this time at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, it really belongs, all of it, to Reuven. It's completely Reuven's bor. And then when Shimon comes and uses it later at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we say that we retroactively clarify when they purchased it that at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it was going to belong to Shimon. So each time anyone uses it, it's completely in their reshus, and that's what the Gemara says. If we read that in the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Sava yesh breira v'hai mididei kamamale v'hai mididei kamamale. Each person, when they use it, they're using. We'll take questions in 1 minute. They're using their own bor that belongs only to them at that time. At the time they're using it, it's considered it's only to them, because we'll retroactively clarify that the kinyan that they made will be for that time when they're using it. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds, and the other opinion holds ein breira. And in this case, that would translate to, we can't say when they use it, it really belongs to only him. He's really using the other person's bor as well, and he's more like a shoyel on the bor. In other words, he's borrowing the bor from someone else. It's not the complete ownership at that time he uses it is upon him. He's rather using a thing which is half his and half the other person's, but at that time he's allowed to use it, and he's automatically like borrowing the other person's chelek in the bor. So if we'll just finish off one thing, so how does that translate to the machloikis they had about whether or not you have to hand over the cover, or if you just leave it mishtamish? So we'll say like this. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he's the one that said you have to hand over the actual covering. That's because when each person uses the bor, he is in charge of the, let's go the other way around. The Rabbanon say ein breira. The Rabbanon say ein breira. So when I'm using it, when each person's using it, he's considered he's shoyel, he's borrowing the other person's half. So this Rashi explains, so when the second person's using it, he's considered a shoyel on the shbor for the other person. Now, when you're a shoyel, you take responsibility to watch whatever you are shoyel. You saw in earlier when a person's shoyel a shore, he's chayav for the nezikin that the shore will do. If he's borrowing the shore, he has to watch the shore. So too over here, if you're borrowing the bor, you're going to have to watch the bor for the other person. So therefore, that's why the first person is going to be potter, because it's all in the responsibility of the second person, who now is the shoyel on the bor. He's now responsible of it without the first person giving over the cover to him. Automatically, he's a shoyel, because if you hold of ein breira, then when the second person is using the bor, he's automatically a shoyel on the bor, and then he's automatically a shoyel for the first person, and therefore he'll take responsibility, and the first person will be potter. That's what the Rabbanon hold. That's why the Rabbanon are the opinion that as long as once the first person leaves, the second person being mishtamish, then the second person becomes a shoyel on the bor, and therefore the first person is potter. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he holds yesh breira. If you hold yesh breira, then each time the person uses the bor, it's considered as if he's using his own bor. He's not automatically a shoyel on the other person's chelik. He's using his own bor. If he's not a shoyel, so he hasn't taken responsibility for the first person. So the first person can only lose his responsibility when he hands over the delete. What does handing over the cover of the bor do? Handing over the cover of the bor shows him, I'm now making you a shoyel on this bor, and I'm making you responsible for it. So that's what the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds. So until the first person does that and appoints him actually to watch it and to be a shoyel over it, then the first person is not going to lose liability for the bor. So there's a lot of details and a lot of complications, but I hope that was somewhat clear that this question or not, whether the first person will be potter, really depends on whether the second person became a shoyel on the bor, and that's dependent on yesh breira or ein breira. If you hold of ein breira, then automatically when he uses it, he's becoming a shoyel, because we don't say it's retroactively clarifying that it was his. We do not hold of a principle of retroactively clarifying it. So therefore, he becomes a shoyel on the other person's chelik. And if you hold of yesh breira, then he doesn't become a shoyel on the other person's chelik. He's using his own chelik, and the second person has to actually appoint him as a shoyel by handing over the cover of the ball. So yeah, we'll just take some questions. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So then the Gemara continues and says another application of this Yisoid of breira. Each opinion is going to go according to what they said in another place. That's what we say in the yeshiva. They're going l'shitasa. They're going according to their opinions. The Snan. We have a Mishnah in Nedarim. Just a brief introduction to Nedarim. There's a whole Nedarim is a Masechta about, guess what, Nedarim? About making a neder, and loosely the principles of making a neder is that a person can prohibit upon himself certain objects or certain things. A person can say all fruits in the world should be asa to me, and then a person becomes asa to the fruits or something like this. So this Mishnah we're dealing with in Nedarim talks about shutfin, as we've been speaking about. That both shutfin in a chatzah. That means they used to have in those days rov tashmishan b'chatzah. Rashi Bava Basra says that most of people's lives or their tashmish they were doing was done in the chatzah, like a front yard. A lot of the things that they would do there was a very useful area, and that was in front of the houses. So if you'd have two houses with a chatzah in front of the two houses, that's called chatzah hashutfin, right? One Reuben lives in this house, Shimon lives in this house. There's a chatzah in the middle. That's called chatzah hashutfin, which belongs to both of them. So what happens to shutfin? Shenodru hana zeh mizeh. Reuben said, "I'm not going to get hana from Shimon or the nechasim of Shimon. Shimon's property, I'm not going to get any benefit from." And Shimon said, "I'm not going to get any benefit from Reuven's property." So for sure, Reuven can't come for Shabbos lunch to Shimon because he just said he's not going to get any hana from Shimon's property. But what happens to the chatzah that's in between? The chatzah is a chatzah shutfus. There's a courtyard which is in shutfus. Can they go into the chatzah now? So the Tanna Kama says, "Asurin lekanis." They are also to go into the chatzah now. Reuven cannot go into the chatzah because it's considered he's going into the chatzah of Shimon, and he just said he's not going to get hana from Shimon. And Shimon can't go into the chatzah because it's considered the chatzah of Reuven. So neither of them can go into the chatzah. They'll have to go through the house through their back door. I don't know how, but then they can't go through the chatzah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov oimer zeh nichnas latoich shaloi, zeh nichnas latoich shaloi. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says no, they can actually go into the chatzah. They can go through the chatzah. Why? The Maika Miflagi. What's the machloikas over here? Why do the Rabbanon say you can't go into the chatzah? And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says you can. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov sava yesh breira. Back to our favorite cloud. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds yesh breira. Therefore, hai l'denafshei ayin, v'hai l'denafshei ayin. Each shutuf, when they go into the chatzah, we can say, like we said, we retroactively clarify that the chatzah belongs to him at that point where he is there. So each one can go in. It's not considered, therefore, that Reuben is being neh from the nechasim of Shimon. Because when Reuben walks into this chatzah, which it seems belongs to both of them, with the principle of yesh breira, we can clarify that at that point in time, 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, when Reuben walked into the chatzah, it was actually his and only his. So therefore, he's not being neh. He's not getting benefit from Shimon's nechasim. And similarly, Shimon, when Shimon walked into the chatzah, we say the same thing. It retroactively clarifies that at this point, Shimon's walking in, there it belongs to him and only him. Therefore, that's the heter that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov allows them both to walk into the chatzah. Rabbanon savri ein breira. Rabbanon hold ein breira, and therefore we cannot retroactively clarify when they go in. Rather, we say it belongs to both of them, and one, like we said before, is maybe a shoyel on the other one's part, but in any event, it's not belonging to him when he walks in. And if it doesn't belong to him, then it doesn't allow them both to go into the chatzah at all. Therefore, according to the Rabbanon, the neder will prohibit either of them from going into the chatzah because the chatzah belongs to both of them. And ein breira, we cannot clarify that when one walks in, it was only his. It's really both of theirs always. Maybe one there's a shoyel on the other one, but it's still going to be prohibited because of the neder. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds they can both go into the chatzah because we say when they go in that it belonged to them. Now, if you're going to ask me if they can both go into the chatzah at the same time, so I'm not sure about that. I think they probably can both go into the chatzah at the same time. And we'll say that the area, at least in the chatzah that he is, belong to him and the area belong to him. But I'm not 100% sure about that. But in any event, for sure, separately, they can both go into the chatzah. And we can assume the time when they went in, it belonged to each person because of the yesod of yesh breira. Yeah. But by the chatzah? Yeah, so by the chotzer, the definition of Baruch just after to clarify of yesh breira and ein breira is as follows. When two people own the chotzer and they made a neder, neder means that I'm going to prohibit on myself a certain action, which according to the Torah, I'm allowed to do, right? I'm allowed to eat cheesecake, right? But a person can say they're going to make a neder that all cheesecakes in the world are going to be upon me like a korban, meaning like osa. I'm not going to do it. That's what the neder can do. It can turn something which is mutter to you to be something which is osa. So over here, these two shuktim, which had two houses and the chotzer in the middle, they said they had a fight with each other, and they said, I'm not going to get hana from you, and you're not going to get hana from me. They both made a mutual neder with each other, and they're not going to get hana from each other. The question is, what about the chotzer in front of their houses? Are they allowed to walk in the chotzer? Because walking through the chotzer is considered that you're being neder from the other person's property, right? Reuben can't come into the chotzer of Shimon if he's not allowed to get benefit from Shimon, because he's viewing that just the walking itself, there's some discussion about this, but just the dris of the regel is considered he's getting hana from Shimon. So can they go into the chotzer or not? So this depends on whether we hold a breira or not breira. How does it translate? Because if you hold yesh breira, that holds we can retroactively clarify that when a person uses the shutfus, at that point it belongs only to him, solely his. So that's brilliant. Now when Reuben walks into the chotzer, he can walk into the chotzer and say, this is my chotzer. Because we retroactively clarified that when we purchased this chotzer, this time was going to be my time. So then he's allowed to do that, and that's not against his neder. His neder was he's not going to get benefit from Shimon. At this point in time, the chotzer belongs to Reuben. So he's not getting benefit from the Shimon's chotzer. He's getting benefit from his own chotzer, and that's allowed. Similarly, the next day Shimon can walk into the chotzer, and we'll clarify that at this point it's his. So it allows us to clarify that the chotzer belonged to each person at the time they were there. That's yesh breira, and therefore they're allowed to go into the chotzer. Masha Enkein, the other opinion of ein breira, so they hold you can never clarify that it belongs to solely one of them when they went into the chotzer. It isn't. It belongs to both of them at all the times. One of them's allowed to use it at certain times, but it's considered he's using the other person's chotzer as well. Maybe he's a shoyed on the other person's chotzer, but he's certainly not his entirely, and therefore the neder will prohibit him from using the chotzer. Yeah.
I would venture to suppose that in the nature of this case,
Okay, let's carry on. Now we're going on to a new topic a little bit. Omar Rebbe Loza. It's about 4 lines up from the bottom. Omar Rebbe Loza. Hamoiche bor lechaveiroi. Kevan shemosa loy dalioi kono. If someone sells a boar to his friend, since from the moment he hands over the covering to the boar, kono, the friend acquired the boar. This Gemara just requires a little bit of introduction, and understand that the Shir learned Bava Basra together. So I'm sure you're all experts in all kinyanim and how you sell land and how you sell metaltalid. But one of the ways to sell land, there's 3 ways to sell land, is through a kesef shtar chazakah. Right? If you want to sell land to somebody else, you can either do it through kinyan kesefs, he gives you the money, or you can write a shtar on the land, I'm selling you the field, or you can do a kinyan chazakah, which means that the purchaser goes down to the field and makes some sort of chazakah, meaning some sort of tikkun in the field, or he plows it a little bit, or he puts up a fence, or he breaks down a fence. He does some sort of tikkun in the field. So here we say that if someone sells a boar is karka, to his friend, once he's handed over the cover of the boar, he acquires the boar. So this is a very interesting Gemara, because there is no real such kinyan as handing over a cover of the boar. It's not a kinyan. We know that in terms of Jewish law, the only way to acquire something is to do a kinyan, to do a ma'aser kinyan. So there's no kinyan yet on this board.
like the other things which, like the elephant, I just give to Masora.
You're right. You can. That's the Gemara is going to speak about that. That's true for metaltalin. There's other kinyan for metaltalin like Hagbar and Mashicha, but these things won't work for character. For character, you need kesef, shtar, chazakah, maybe kinyan chalip, and also, but this won't be a kinyan. So the Gemara says straight away, hey chidami, what's the case? Iba kaspa, if we're dealing with the guy gave money, likni bakaspa, then you made a kinyan with the money. Iba chazakah, says the Gemara, likni bechazakah. If we're dealing with a case where we did chazakah, then you let him do chazakah. And I saw one of the other Rishonim added in. And if he wrote him a shtar, then he's got it with a shtar. So what's going on? What's the significance in handing over the cover of the book? So the Gemara says, La'olam b'chazakah. Really, we're dealing with the case that the purchaser, the koine, did a kinyan chazakah on the land, on the board. The halacha is with kinyan chazakah, when you sell land to somebody else, it's not enough you say, I'm selling you my land. You have to say to them, lech chazek ukni. If you want to go and do a chazakah in the land, he can't just do a chazakah on his own right, even though he knows you want to sell him the land. There's a halacha, the Gemara says here and in Baba Basra, that you have to tell him, you have to give him reshus to go and do a chazakah in the land. You have to say, lech, go, chazek, do a chazakah ukni, and purchase it. Normally that's the thing that the seller has to tell the buyer. He has to give him reshus to go and do the ma'aseh chazakah. It's not enough they just agreed to sell it. He has to agree to sell it and say, okay, now go do a chazakah and be kohen. That's normally. Now the Gemara says here, "V'kevan shemosa loy dalio," since he handed over the cover of the board, commander omale lech chazek ukni dami. It's as if he told him lech chazek ukni. So that's the significance of the handing over the cover of the board. It's in place of saying lech chazek ukni. Normally you have to say that the buyer to the seller has to, the seller to the buyer. If I said it wrong before, I meant the seller to the buyer. The moicha has to say to the koneh, to the purchaser, the seller has to say, go and make a chazakah in the land. But in this case with the board, if he didn't hand over the cover of the board, so he'd tell him, lech chazek ukni, go do a chazakah and acquire the board. But if he handed over the cover of the board, it's in place of saying, go and do a chazakah. Because it's like telling him here's the cover for the board, it's yours now, you can go and use it, you can go and mishtamish in it, you can go and do the chazakah. It's as if he told him. So that's the significance of handing over the cover of the board. Now the Gemara says further on another two statements in a similar vein. The last line of it, ben Levi, someone who sold a house to his friend. Once he handed over the key, the purchaser has acquired the house. So the same question over here. What kind of kinyan is handing over the key? You have Tosfos a little bit speaks about maybe there is some significance in it, but Pashtus says no kinyan through giving over the key. So what is the significance of giving over the key? So the Gemara says, hey chidami, the same question, it's the same structure. If we're dealing with where the purchaser gave money, then he purchased it with money. If he did a chazakah on the house, he made a tikkun in the house, he fixed the door, he fixed the wall or something, then he's going to acquire it with a chazakah. Why does he have to hand over the key? So the Gemara says, la'olam b'chazakah. He really did it with a chazakah. The same halacha. He's supposed to tell the purchaser that the buyer is supposed to sell, the seller is supposed to tell the buyer, lech chazek ukni. That's when the seller of the house has to tell him, you want to be acquiring with a chazakah, go and do a chazakah. But if he handed over the key, the buyer can go ahead and do a chazakah without the seller telling him mufurash, because he handed over the key. Once you've handed over the key, that's in place of saying the lech chazek ukni. So in both Gemaras, the klal is one. When you sell something to somebody else, and you agree that I'm selling you a piece of land, normally the halacha is if I'm letting you do a kinyan chazakah, then I have to tell you lech chazek ukni, and then you go ahead and do the chazakah. But in these two cases, selling the board and I hand over you the cover of the board, or selling the house and I hand over you the key for the house, both of those actions of handing over, it's in place of saying lech chazek ukni. That's these two Gemaras. And the final Gemara on a similar vein, Amareish Lakish Mashum Rabbi Yanai. Amoiche Eidel Lechavera is a little bit Baruch what you were speaking about. If someone sells a flock of animals to his friend, we're not talking about no character, we're talking about metaltalim, animals. Kevan Shemosa Loi Mashchuchis, since he handed over the Mashchuchis, we'll see what that is in a minute. The Gemara is going to define what that is, a certain object. Since he handed over that object, Kana, the person has acquired the flock of animals. Says the Gemara, hey chidami, what's the case? Even Mashiach, if the buyer did Mashiach on the animals, he gave the animal a little bit of a hit and it ran in front of him, or he called him to come. The Gemara in Kedushin says that's what Mashiach is. You call the animal to come to you and it starts walking towards you. That's a good kinyan for an animal. Then likni b'Mashiach. Why do you have to hand over this object of the mashchuchis? Why do you have to hand it over? You purchased it, acquired it with Mashiach. Even Masira, if you acquired it with Masira, which is handing over like the reins of the animal, then likni b'Masira. But not with this handing over this mashchuchis. What is that involved over here? That's not handing over the reins of the animal. So that's not a kinyan. So then the Gemara says, La'olam b'Mashiach. We're dealing with a case where the purchaser acquired it with a kinyan Mashiach, which is dragging. He dragged the animal or he cause the animal to walk towards him. Normally, when you do kinyan mashicha, this is an interesting thing you see from this Gemara. Not only in chazakah, you have to tell the person lech chazakah. Also, by kinyan mashicha, when you sell an object to someone, you have to say to them, "Go and do mashicha on this object in order to acquire it." Lech mashoichu kni. You normally have to say that. I'll just add in an aside. The Gemara in Baba Basra says there is a difference whether or not you're in front of the seller and the buyer in front of each other, or they're not in front of each other. If they're in front of each other, it's befonov, then he doesn't have to tell him lech hazeichu kni or lech mashoichu kni, do mashicha on it, because they're right in front of each other, and he sees what he's doing, and it's as if he said it in event. In essence, as if he said it, so you don't have to say it. The requirement to say it is only if the koner, the purchaser, is doing the chazakah or the mashicha not in the presence of the seller. Then the seller had to tell him beforehand, leich chazeichu kni or leich mashoichu kni, as we see in this Gemara, selling the animals. Go and, like if they're discussing the sale of the animals inside in the house, and the animals are out in the field. So then they discuss, they want to sell the animals. So once the seller said, "Yeah, I'm going to sell them to you," he then goes to work, and the buyer is going to go and do the kinyan. So he had to tell him beforehand, leich mashoichu kni. But since over here came on the mostale mashchuchis, since he handed over this object of the mashchuchis, then commander amale mashoichu kni dami. It's as if he has said to him, leich mashoichu kni. Now the $1 million question, my mashchuchis, what is this mashchuchis we're talking about? That we said if the buyer when they're selling the animals, if he handed it over, then you're koine. What's mashchuchis? Hacha tirgemu karakashta. Over here, hacha meaning in Bavel, where the Gemara was written in Bavel, they translated it to mean karakashta, which is the bell. A bell that the shepherd used to use to call the animals to come in a certain direction, or to all come here, come, we're going to go and graze in another field. The bell, that bell is a thing that obviously the Baal Ha'eda, the owner of the flock, uses to control the flock. Once you've handed that over, the seller doesn't have to say anymore lechem mashoichu kni if he said it. That's what they said in Bavel. Rabbi Yaakov said no. Isa the Oslo Baresh Edra. It's referring to the actual A's, the goat that is leading the flock. As Rashi says, there was one special goat which was a charif, a strong-willed and strong physically goat which would lead the flock wherever he would go. Everyone would follow. So that's also a symbol of being in control of the Eidah. So handing over such an animal will be in place of saying leich mashoichu kni. Even though you normally need to say leich mashoichu kni, but handing over that thing is in place of saying that. Yeah. Why? That's a good question. Why is it that he actually have to say leich mashoichu kni?
Let's say the guy
right. There, I think in such a case, that's a good question. If somebody cannot speak, I think for sure in such a case, it will be enough some sort of gilui das. He either would write it or he would make sign language from it. It's not a thing that you specifically need to say in your mouth. It has to be that we saw that was the das of the moiche. Well, if he took money, then he would have acquired it with money. The kinyan might have been with money, unless they specified the money wouldn't make the kinyan. But one of the explanations could be this. I heard recently in the shiurim in the Mir from Rav Asher Arieli. It could be that in order to do a chazakah or a mashicha, these are actions that the purchaser is doing on the object, right? And when you do a ma'aser kinyan, there's a lot of discussion in the Achronim exactly how the ma'aser kinyan works, but we could explain that a ma'aser kinyan shows that I'm the owner of the object. I'm doing a certain action on the object, which is showing the world that I'm the bailim on the object. For example, chazakah. Yesterday it wasn't my field. I'm going down into the field and I'm going and planting some trees or uprooting some trees. I'm doing an action. It's a hoiras bailis, you'd say. It shows that I'm the bailim on the object. So it could be that unless the owner gives him a specific reshus to go and do that action, then you have got no right also to in somebody else's field to go and do a ma'aser that's showing you're a bailim, when really that looks like you're really being a gazlan, because it's not your field. and you don't have any rights to go and start making tikkunim in the field. So until the owner actually tells you and gives you reshus to go ahead and do that ma'aser chazakah, then we see that action you're doing is showing you're the owner. We view that as now a ma'aser that the bailim would do, and that could acquire it for you. Yeah, the love zakamani has transacted, has gone over. Yeah, I'm going to sell it to you, but yeah, I'm going to sell it to you, but I haven't specified how or why. Right, they consented to make the sale, but they didn't do the actual sale. And until he tells him, go ahead and do the mashicha, which also is showing that you're a bailim, or go ahead and do the chazakah, then right. Right. And we're doing it in a case where there was no shtar or no. Right, that's what he was. Yeah. So the Gemara just finishes off over here with a little piece of a gadata about this. We see this A's that we mentioned, this goat that went in front of the flock, that was in charge of the flock. The Gemara says, certain Galilean made this drasha alei the Rav Chisda, kad ragis raya al ana. When kad ragis, when he's angry, the raya, when the shepherd is angry on his flock, so he this is a mashal for Hashem. When Hashem's angry with the Jewish people, then avid lenagda samusa. He turns the nagda, the leader of the flock, into a blind goat. Which Rashi explains when Hashem, unfortunately, wants to give sorrows to Klal Yisrael, so he appoints on them leaders that are not so muhugan, not so appropriate and not so fitting. So that's one of the ways that Hashem will unfortunately cause us sorrows, by giving us leaders or people that are in charge of what's going on that aren't so well. I'm not talking politics, I'm just saying what the Gemara says. But the Gemara says that there's bad leaders will come about when unfortunately sorrows will be brought to Klal Yisrael. That's definitely a reason to be mechazek and do tshuva. So we've reached a new Mishnah. Why do we need so many cases of saying lech of the same thing? So right. They each do have an element of chiddush. The first one was giving over the cover of the board. The second one was giving over the keys to the house. And the third one was the third one is a chiddush, because you see, even by kinyan mashicha, you need to say leich mashoichu kni. That's a chiddush. But maybe we wouldn't have known necessarily that giving over the key is as good as giving over the cover of the board, or vice versa. But that's a good question. That's a good question. That's good. Yeah, that's a good deal that Rav Malamed is making. In the third case, it doesn't mention about bringing kesef. If I'm not mistaken, that's because kesef doesn't actually make a kinyan on metaltalin. Right, exactly. Only movable objects, the movable objects metaltalin will be acquired through mashicha or hadba or masira, but not through kesef. Correct. Whereas the first two gemaras were speaking about selling a boar and selling a house, there kesef was mentioned. Correct. Good. So let's see the next mission. The next mission is also a continuation of Dinei Bor, digging a pit. Kiso Harishon. If the first person covered the bore, again, we're talking about a bore which two people were involved with, our shutfin in. The first person covered the bore. He did his job. He covered it properly. It's completely secure. It's covered. The Shani came along and he found that the bore was uncovered. Right? He came and found that the bore was uncovered. Veloy kisol, and the Shani left it in that state of being uncovered. Hashani chayiv. In this case, the Shani is going to be chayiv because the first person did his duty. He left the bore covered. If you leave the site with a covered up bore, you're fine. But the Shani came along and found it megula. How did he find it megula if the first person covered it? Rashi explains because it rotted. The cover of the bore rot through water, through rain, through whatever it was. The Rishon wasn't supposed to expect that, but the Shani saw that it had rotten and fell in. The sheni left it uncovered. The sheni is going to be chayav. Again, the sheni over here means the second person on the seam, right? The first person covered it and left the seam. Second person is still around, and he sees that it got moldy and it broke in, and he left it. He's chayav. Next case, kisol koroi. If a person covered the bor up properly, and then a shor or chamor fell into the bor. How can it be if it was covered properly? The Gemara is going to also speak about this case. Umeis potter. In such a case, the person's potter because again he did his job properly. He covered the bor properly, and he's potter. It's similar to a case the Mishnah in our koines. Same with a shore. If you keep a shore locked out properly, and some sort of oinus happens that the wall falls down, or the animal does wild jumps over the wall or digs underneath in a way that you weren't expecting it. Since you did a shmira, you're potter. Same thing with a bor. If you do a shmira, even though in the end some sort of nezik happened, you're going to be potter. Like your soul kuroi, but if you don't cover it properly, if you don't cover it properly and then a shor or a chamor falls in, then you're chayav. Also, it's quite obvious. The Gemara is going to speak about exactly what the chiddush of these cases are. Basically, if you cover it properly, you're potter. If you don't cover it properly, you're going to be chayav. Nofa lafanav mikol hakriya chayav. This is an interesting case. The shore was chilling, hanging around the edges of the bore, and you, Mr. the guy who's digging the bore. There's some discussion in Rashi exactly who's doing the banging, but we're going to go with the simple understanding that the person who dug the bore is in the bore and he's busy digging or he's busy banging and he's making noise in the bore. He makes a noise in the bore, and that noise gives the shore a fright, who's at the edge of the bore, and the shore falls into the bore, not naturally, but because he got a fright. Because of the kol kriya, nafal of the shore fell in head first into the bore, and the kol kriya, from the sound of the digging, chayiv. You are chayiv, the person is chayiv in that case. And we don't say maybe it's considered only a groma that he caused. We're going to see sukkahs in the Gemara here about if someone else pushes someone into the bore, who's going to be responsible? Is the balabor going to be responsible? Or is the person who pushes responsible? So all we're going to come to see these sukkahs coming up right now. But the Mishnah says in such a case, the balabor is chayiv. Because at the end of the day, the shore fell into the bore did the damage, the balabor is chayiv. Even though he was caused to fall in through the noise of the person banging with a hammer. But mitzad sheni, that's if the shore fell in head first. La'achrav mikol kriya, if the shore fell in backwards, then potter. Then he's potter. Why is he potter? So the Gemara is going to discuss exactly this case. What are we talking about? Either he's potter because we're going with the opinion that the mazik in the bore is the hevel. The hevel is the damaging thing in the bore. Only when a shore falls in, I'm not sure if Rabbi Teichtel filled you in on this, but when the shore falls in head first, then it will breathe in the bad air at the bottom of the bore, and then for sure the hezek was done to the shore through the hevel. But if it fell in backwards, mouth up, so then it was damaged by the chabat, and that's not chayav according to one opinion. Or another way to explain the Mishnah is referring to that he fell actually outside of the bore. He didn't fall in the bore. The achra means he fell on the edge of the bore, but not in the bore. But we'll see that in the Gemara. Let's try and finish off the Mishnah if we have time. Nafal asoichoi shor v'keilav v'nishtabru, chamor v'keilav v'niskaru, chayav ala behema upata ala keilim. This is the halacha which I'm sure you've learned. This is the Mishnah, this is the makor for the halacha that bor is potter on kalim. Right? If kalim fall into a bor, kalim for all intents and purposes doesn't necessarily mean a cup or what we would call a kli, any sort of kli, a phone, clothes, all sorts of metaltalin are mostly defined as kalim. They fall into the bor that you're potter on them. You're chayav for a shor v'chamor, right? But you're potter on kalim. So that's why the Mishnah says nafal of shor v'keilav. If a shore and it's kalim on the shore fell and the shore comes with certain how do you call it, a saddle, right? A saddle and reins and all sorts of parts besides for the animal there's kalim. So you're chayav for the death of the animal, but you're not chayav for any damage that was done to the kalim. Same so too with the chamor if they tore the kalim. Nafal asoicha shor cheirish shoyta b'kotzon chayav. A shore which is a cheirish, a blind shore, or a shore shoyta, a shore which has got no das, a crazy shore, or a small shore, you're chayav on it, because that shore, we don't say should have looked where he was going. This is an interesting halacha. Shore pikeach that falls into the bore, you're actually potter on. A normal shore, a healthy shore who falls into the bore, you're potter, because we say that shore should have looked where he was going. Yeah, he should have looked where he was going. He caused himself. I didn't cause the damage to that shore. He caused the damage to himself. He should have looked where he was going. so you're potter. So you only have on the shore, which is a cheirish shota or a cotton. The last thing the Mishnah says is ben oibas evedoi ama potter. If a child or the boy or a girl or eved or ama falls, a slave, a man, slave or a slave woman falls into the boy, you're potter, because that's the halacha that shore is potter on adam. Shore v'lei adam chamor v'lei kalim. Not that. Sorry, shore v'lei adam. Right. Shore v'lei adam. Only if a shore falls in, but if a person falls into the bore, if I'm not mistaken, and dies in the bore, then you're potter for paying for that person to fell into the bore. Therefore, benu bas eved v'ama, you're potter. That's what the Mishnah says. Okay, I think we will stop here for today. Thank you, everyone.